So Math 1316 students, I'm going to try to do a somewhat quick video. I have another meeting to get to very quickly, so let's see if I can share screen and show you a bit about the upcoming test. So your upcoming test is on Chapter 9, and on Chapter 9, you're going to see a whole lot of pieces and parts. Let me see if I can get this a little bit higher. And so there's a lot you need to know out of Chapter 9. And so for preparing for this test, I don't know if you use index cards or if you use note paper, how you put all your stuff together, but I would go back and each one of the examples that we took time for me to point out or to get you to watch his video, or I added a video, I would make sure, like I would go through, and on page 577, this is 9.1, I would make sure that I could plot a point. Can I plot a polar coordinate? And I try to have little polar graphs for you all over the test. But you know, could you do it freehand? But I'll probably have little polar graphs for you. And then on here, can you find several coordinates for a single point? This has been the one I've had several people ask about, so make sure you know how to do that. It is on the test, and it looks like example 3 at the top of 578. I would make sure I know how to convert from polar to rectangular. I mentioned several times in the video to be fluid or fluent, however you want to see it, where you're able to very easily go back from rectangular to polar, and then we added in exponential. And just really feeling comfortable with that. You do get to have your formula sheets in the test, and there are edges where you can write information like, how do I go from P to R, polar to rectangular, and you could put rectangular to polar. And so that just happens. I literally would know how to do one of all of these examples by myself without any aids. And like I even gave you some directions, like how to go from this one to this one, how to go from this one to the other one. And then I would even mention some things where I would say, and make sure you write in on your formula sheet, like, hey, another way to take care of this is when I can multiply both sides by, or not multiply, but I can tan both sides, just little tricks like that, like right here when we are converting. And then down here, when we start talking about how do I get to transform equations, I've got 2 tricks. I can multiply both sides by r, or I have another trick to square both sides. But then later we're going to introduce, oh wait, there's another thing I can do. I can tangent both sides. I'm allowed to do that. So as you're looking through these sections, I would really be listening to where I honed in on and focused on. And here's that example of, you know, I'm allowed to tangent both sides. I would make sure that I understand and can graph. I may not be able to graph this, but as soon as I convert it to rectangular, I'm like, oh, I know what that one is. I can graph that. Make sure you know how to do like example 4, which is just like example 3. Yeah, I can recognize that and graph that. The same thing here, can you do completing the square? And this is example 5, page 588. Can I do that and then graph the circle? Can I do it again and graph? And it's just, you know, the kind of the same example. And then you got into all this other stuff and you're like, wow, that's a lot of stuff. Well, let me boil it down to what's going to be on the test. You need to make these 3 notes somewhere on your formula page of how do I test for symmetry with respect to the x-axis? How do I test with respect to the y-axis and to the origin? And then they're said polar, say the line theta equal pi over 2, and the pole. I'm going to ask you on the test to test. I am not going to get you to graph cardioids. I'm not going to take time in the test, but I am going to ask you on the test to test for the symmetry and report out. Is it symmetric too? I am going to ask you when you have a rose. You might want to jot this down on your formula sheet because you've got 2 asterisks. When you have a rose, how do you determine the number of petals? I'm not going to get you to graph a rose, but the things that I just mentioned, testing for symmetry and making sure you know how to graph horizontal and vertical lines and circles, I am going to ask that. And then we move into the complex plane. That's where I was saying you got to be really fluid, going back and forth, rectangular, polar, and exponential. I would just make sure you have watched, and if you didn't, go back and rewatch the video as well when I said, hey, put this on your formula card, and hey, do you know how to graph this? And do you know how to leave it in rectangular form? Because I shake it up on the test. Sometimes I want your answer in rectangular form. Sometimes I want it in polar. Sometimes I want it in exponential. Hey, sometimes polar and exponential. You got to know how to go in and out of all of these. And that's where I would be making these notes on my formula card, including the notes on how to multiply complex numbers and to divide them. I would make sure on my notes, I know how, or have the Moivre's theorem, and I know how to send a complex number to multiple powers, and I know how to break it down into its roots. So now looking at 9.4, we got into vectors. And make sure you know how to graph a vector. Again, every one of the things that I've pointed out, they're really important. Can you do this graphing of vectors? Can you do the scalars? Like here we go, example 3. Can you, there's a question just like this on the test. Can you go into the component vectors? Can you write it as a unit vector? A lot of stuff you've got to be really familiar with. Like, how do I calculate magnitude? And then there are going to be word problems on this test. So make sure if it's a word problem I pointed out in the videos or that was in his video, make sure you fully understand how to do like the aircraft. Looking up here, can you find the direction angle? And I've asked you to put that formula on your formula card. Oh, and here's a good one. If we're at static equilibrium. And then we end up with 9.5. And when we end up with 9.5, make sure you've written down dot product formula on your formula sheet. And that you've written down, how do I find the angle between my vectors on your formula sheet? And that you know how to calculate it. Make sure you know orthogonal. I'm going to ask you that. Calculate this, calculate the angle. Hey, is it orthogonal? Make sure you know how to do the projection vectors. Make sure you know how to decompose. And then there were a couple of word problems. And I have drawings on the test, but here's a great word problem, example 6, when you're talking about a wagon. And here's a picture. And here's how to compute work. You really need to spend some time on the word problems, like even down here, example 7 at the bottom of 628. It's a really big, involved chapter 9 test, but it's the last test, and then you can focus on the final, and maybe you're kind of doing both right now. But I wish you the very best in studying. Today is Tuesday. You got 1 week. Really pour it on, really get in lots of people to help you with this, the tutoring, the easing your workload or family responsibilities, but really work hard to finish strong in our course. And I do wish you the best, and I do need to cut the recording off. Bye-bye.